Before we get started, let me introduce our panel. My boss at the college, Mr. Thomas Kunkel, serves as the 7th president of St. Norbert College. A former newspaper editor, President Kunkel came to St. Norbert from the University of Maryland, where he was the dean of the Philip Morris College of Journalism. He has written or edited 5 books, including Enormous Prayers, A Journey into the Priesthood, which is a portrait of 28 Catholic priests. During his tenure at St. Norbert, President Kunkel has emphasized the pursuit of excellence, which is reflected in the growing academic reputation of the college and the increase in support from our friends and donors. Another person I answer to, the Most Reverend David Ricken, came to the Diocese of Green Bay in 2008, where he is serving as the 12th bishop of the diocese. Originally ordained in the Diocese of Pueblo, Colorado, Bishop Ricken came to Green Bay from the Diocese of Cheyenne, Wyoming, where, among his other pastoral work, he helped found the Wyoming Catholic College. During his time in Green Bay, Bishop Ricken has written a number of pastoral letters covering such areas of ministry as faith formation and religious instruction, living justice in today's world, and parish life. And finally, the boss that I live with. Abbot Gary Neville, a native of Green Bay, serves as the 6th abbot of the Norbertine community in De Pere. Ordained in 1978 and earning a canon law degree in 1988, Abbot Neville taught high school English and theology, as well as canon law at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. He has served as the Order Secretary-Treasurer, Assistant Formation Director, and Holy Spirit House of Study Superior in Chicago. And Abbot Neville was a member of the St. Norbert College Board of Trustees and currently sits on the corporate boards for the Catholic Theological Union, Notre Dame Academy, and Archmere Academy. If you would help me welcome our panel. This is intended to be a very interactive presentation, so we're going to ask the panelists to respond to a number of questions, one at a time. They'll have a few minutes to respond, and then we'll take questions from you and have some interaction, and then go on to the next question. So the first question is really helping all of us understand what is the relationship between the diocese, the order, and the college. Who would like to go first? It's like my class.
Well, thanks, Jay. I'll start. I'll try. But first, I want to make one small correction to my introduction. I think you said the Philip Morris College of Journalism at Maryland. It was the Philip Merrill College of Journalism. If it had been the Philip Morris College of Journalism, we would have had more money.
Got a cigarette?
And you certainly could have smoked in the building. I also want to thank everyone for putting this together. I don't know, some of you who go back considerably further than I do with St. Norbert College could probably tell us, but I don't know whether we've ever had a meeting of these 3 individuals. And so I very much appreciate Bishop Ricken and Abbot Neville joining us for what I know is going to be a good discussion. As it happens, 4 years ago, when I was in the mix for the college presidency, this was a question that I was keen to know the answer myself, and tried to do as much homework as I could, and had a lot of conversations with people about that. Certainly before I was offered the job, and then before I accepted. The glib answer to this question, what is the relationship between the diocese, the order, and the college, is that it's very healthy. And I'm quite sincere about that. And I think we're very fortunate that way, because it does not take a lot of imagination to think that that would not necessarily be the case. There are clearly inherent tensions, or can be, and we see examples of these, from time to time. But my sense was at the time, and continues to be, that we work very hard to try to make sure that this triangular relationship is a healthy one, and that it works. And it does take work, and I in particular want to single out Jay and Deacon Tim Riley, who very intentionally make efforts to keep the lines of communications you know, open and clear. We all have agreed, all of us, that, you know, it's important that we try to obey, we try to follow the no surprise rule, so that whatever, you know, the one is doing, if it is something that is apt to, you know, cause a potential problem, you know, for one of the other parties, they hear about it from us first, and they understand, you know, why we're doing what we're doing, or having this program, or whatever. That, I think, has worked very well. The last thing I'll say is, from a technical standpoint, the college is an entity of the order. The Norbertine Order is the corporate body for the college. They're the owner. Put another way, they have this great car, and it belongs to them, but they give, you know, me and the administrators the keys through the trustees, you know, to operate it, and they really do let us drive, and as long as we are driving intelligently and in the right direction, you know, everything works very well. But if there was ever a point where they felt like we weren't driving in the right direction, they have the right, dare say, the obligation to pull the keys back. And finally, where does the diocese come in? And I'll let these gentlemen speak to that. You know, we are a college of the order, but under ex corde, we operate in the Diocese of Green Bay, and so the bishop has certain obligations to ensure the Catholicity of a Catholic institution. And as I say, I'll let them speak to that. But I think the answer to the question about the nature of the relationship is fundamentally that it's very strong and very healthy.
I could go next unless you wanted to.
Fine.
I'd just like to say ditto to what President Kunkel said. Since I came, we've been meeting about 4 or 5 times a year, and with the faculties of different the religious studies and also the mission department. And then the 3 of us have been meeting with Deacon Tim and Father Jay to assist us, and I found that very, very helpful. But that's not something new. That was with Bishop Zubik and with Bishop Banks somewhat before. So there's a long history of dialogue between the diocese and the abbey and the college. This is not true all over the country. I think Father Jay said this morning when I talked to him that he was just at a vice president for mission meeting in Washington, and many other colleges have not even begun to have dialogues as deeply and as seriously as we have. We may think in many ways we have a long ways to go, but in other ways we're way, way ahead of many other situations. So I'm very grateful to that. With regard to the role of the bishop, I'd like to mention from Ex Corde Ecclesiae, just quote a paragraph because it kind of lays out what my responsibility is. Bishops have a particular responsibility to promote Catholic universities, and especially to promote and assist in the preservation and strengthening of their Catholic identity, including the protection of their Catholic identity in relation to civil authorities. This will be achieved more effectively if close personal and pastoral relationships exist between the university and church authorities, characterized by mutual trust, close and consistent cooperation, and continuing dialogue, even though they do not enter directly into the internal government of the university. So that's something important to realize. I don't govern the university. That's not my competence, not my office. Bishops should be seen, however, not as external agents, but as participants in the life of the Catholic University. Now that's where it gets a little bit sticky from time to time. And that's why it's so important to have a culture of dialogue and exchange, of listening to one another, and listening to the communion of the church. Communio is very much a very deep concept that was brought about and featured in many ways in the Second Vatican Council. And first of all, it goes back modeled on the Trinitarian communion, and then the communion also with the universal church. So we have a communion that is very broad and leads all the way as a model to eternal life. So this kind of a culture of an ambit is something that we need to constantly grow at reflecting in the local church, with the university having her proper role, her proper place, not necessarily a pride of place, and that's a primacy of place, but definitely a pride of place in the diocesan picture. And so that cooperation is very, very important. And once in a while there are conflicts, and that's why we have to be talking and have dialogue.
From an insider's perspective, and from the community's perspective, St. Norbert College is our flagship apostolate. And so it is very, very important to each one of us. There's a very keen personal interest in this college by Norbertines. It bears our name, and certainly the sweat and the blood of many Norbertines over the 114 years that this institution has existed. And while our numbers may be smaller from the days when it was only Norbertines who taught or worked at this institution, we still have many and numerous contacts across the board. Certainly current students and former students and staff and faculty and administration, the alumni, the alumnae, parents. Even I get comments sometimes from people on the street when I get pointed out. I was in Hungary just before Christmas to be at a funeral of one of the members of our abbey, and was walking down the streets of Budapest at night, enjoying the Christmas ambiance, and the prior who I was with introduced me to someone that he happened to know, and they were with somebody who had sent 2 of their children to St. Norbert College. So you never know. We're in some ways we're everywhere, but we're informed. And I'm very proud to say that Norbertines at the college in years past promoted, and they fought for collaboration with other lay people in this institution. We were one of the first colleges to move in that direction. The Norbertines knew they could not do it all, and so collaboration has been very, very important. As abbot, I can very honestly say that I do not lose any sleep over this institution. Thank you.
Darn.
When people ask me what my job is like, I say, well, and I hope my converse aren't offended, but I said, I got like 60 kids. So there's a lot of things, other things that I need to attend to. So this institution is in good hands, and it's guided by professionals at all levels. And I think you all know your jobs. I have been able to view the job descriptions that probably would fill several encyclopedias. So everyone knows their job. And certainly I, as abbot, and the members of the Abbot's Council understand, I think, our responsibilities. I probably, and I don't mean to be flippant, but I've kind of developed this whole notion of benign neglect. Okay, that's kind of how I see my relationship to the college. If it's running well, then you let it do its job. You let it do what it does well. And certainly the way things are set up, corporately and civilly, I wouldn't be allowed to be a micromanager, and I would never want to be. I think that's very important to understand. There are reserved powers that do come into play, some more than others, to approve the pool of possible trustees. It happens maybe once a year or so. Every year we get to look the budget over. And of course, part of the inherent danger in that is before I was abbot, I was the abbey treasurer. So I think the one time I had to tackle the Board of Trustee president was about finances and just raising some concerns and engaging in a little longer dialogue than perhaps he would have wanted. And that's Mr. Kelly. Yes. No, I don't want to. But we are very serious and I think diligent about being the sponsoring community for this school. And we wanted to maintain its philosophy and its mission and identity as a Catholic institution. That's very, very important to us. And ultimately, just last week, Tom and I met. I think for the last 4 abbots, the abbot and the president have met on a regular basis. For the last 9 years, I have met monthly with Bill and with Tom. I go into his office and I say, well, what do I need to know? And then I say, or he asks me, what have you heard? Pretty right. It works well.
Thank you. So any questions or comments for these 3 about this particular topic, just the relationship in general?
Well, it's not really a question, it's just a comment. You all talked a lot about meeting with each other and with our 2 institutions or 3 institutions on a regular basis. I just wanted to add to that, there's a small group of staff from the Mission Student Affairs Division, 6 of us that are meeting with 6 diocesan staff on a somewhat regular basis as a way to try to keep that dialogue going at not just the administrative level, but at other levels of the organizations. And the hope is at some point to make that dialogue a little wider of the staff and the diocese and the college folks.
Very good.
Does the order, I'm sorry, Gary, not to remember this. Does the order contribute to the annual budget?
Indirectly. The endowment fund that we originally set up some years ago was intended to pay the salaries of Norbertines. And then anything over and above that, there were several recommendations that go towards scholarships or go to the annual budget of the college. I suspect that probably makes a little more than what is paid out in Norbertine salaries. So I guess indirectly there is money that is contributed to the college via that particular endowment. And then we also, I believe, it's $100,000 every year directly to scholarships.
We get a salary?
More than I do.
Any other questions or thoughts about the relationship?
Just historically, what your predecessors, what stands out as an area where they didn't get along on, and if so, how was that resolved, or has there been anything particular that was contentious?
Well, again, just from my conversations, and Gary alluded to it a while ago, when probably one of the most challenging passes they had was when the college and the trustees wanted to issue the bond that was eventually going to pay for the library and Grease Hall and the renovations of Todd Weir. That moved along to a point, but under the reserve clause, the Abbey had some concerns, and so there were protracted negotiations, and it was really a question of clarification, I think, and comfort level. Everything about this institution, at least from a fiduciary standpoint, the assumption is that we want to approach it conservatively, safely. We don't want to, the tolerance for risk, is not that high, and that has served us very well. This was an unusual situation. It was a lot of money. I mean, we had a plan for how it was going to be covered, but that all transpired before I got here. But it had happened recently enough that I was certainly aware of what had gone on, and it all worked out. But there was a little more drama than is typical of the relationship.
We just had to have more dialogue, so we were a little bit more aware, and ultimately, over the time that ensued, the market improved in several respects, and the cost of bonds went significantly down, and it actually was much better. And I even had Mr. Kelly say, wow, you were right. So,
Well, unfortunately, if you know Pat Kelly, you know he really, really, really likes to have his judgment questioned. But it all worked out.
We heard about ongoing meetings with the bishop and the president or members of the college and the abbot and the president. Are there times when bishop and abbot, the two of you, meet with any regularity, or?
We meet from time to time, but that's mostly about the business between the order and the diocese or the bishop. At that time, we'll also catch one another up if there's anything that each of us ought to be aware of regarding the college. There's not a formal meeting slated for that, but when we do have our meetings from time to time, that may come up if there's an issue or something I need to be aware of. Would you agree with that, Gary? Yeah.
unfortunately, we usually meet at funerals.
Yeah, unfortunately. We do have sit-down meetings once in a while, though. So.
Probably having to do with what Gary calls the kids.
I would like to mention, too, I had a chance to visit with Bishop Banks when I first came, and when Excordia Ecclesiae first started, he expressed that time in the history of the diocesan relationship to St. Norbert as kind of bumpy. I wasn't here, and I didn't have a chance to go into that with him, but I think in many, this was kind of symptomatic of relationships between Catholic colleges and universities and the local ordinary, especially after the Second Vatican Council, and some colleges saw Excordia Ecclesiae as an intrusion into their academic freedom, etc. He made some kind of reference to that. I don't want to speak for him, but simply to say at that time, from his point of view, it was kind of pretty bumpy. I think there's a lot of growth taking place since then. Not that we won't have disagreements or understandings of things we need to continuously clear up, and the area for growth is always great, especially when you're trying to build communion. That's a never-ending challenge. But he indicated to me that he thought things were better, and that's a good sign, I think. And so I had a chance to visit with him. As you know, we just completed the 10th anniversary of the implementation of Excordia Ecclesiae, and I asked St. Norbert and Father Jay and his department did a lot of the work to complete that 10-year analysis. Some of you were involved in that, of how we're doing, and I was very pleased with the report, and I can report out to Cardinal George and the bishops in my region of where we are and what we've done, and that was a good feeling to be able to report back so many good things.
Let me go on to the next question, and it's the vision of higher education in the church and society. And we had a sub question about academic freedom, and I think maybe because of time, if you all want to respond to both of those at once, that'd be great.
Who wants to start?
Let me just start with a couple of quotes from Excordia Ecclesiae. This is a very handy document, by the way, if you kind of want to know what the vision of the universal church is in regard to Catholic colleges and universities. I keep going back to it, especially when we get lost in discussions, just to kind of set a path or see a clearer vision. I find it extremely helpful. And I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs because they're pertinent to this. The purpose of a Catholic university is education and academic research proper to the disciplines of the university. Since it enjoys the institutional autonomy appropriate to an academic institution, its governance is and remains internal to the institution itself. Academic freedom is an essential component of a Catholic university. The university should take steps to ensure that all professors are accorded a lawful freedom of inquiry and of thought, and of freedom to express their minds humbly and courageously about those matters in which they enjoy competence. Those who are engaged in the sacred disciplines enjoy a lawful freedom of inquiry and of prudentially expressing their opinion on matters in which they have expertise, while observing the submission obsequio, which has a very particular meaning, due to the magisterium of the church. So this is that fine balancing act that has to happen between an obsequio, it's a Latin word obsequium, which means not just obedience to the church's teaching, but an adhesion And adhesion is one of those words they use in the context of discussing communio. And so this is something that we have to continuously work at. And for my part, I need to be careful not to intervene in a way that hurts the proper exploration of divine truth and of church teaching, of scripture, etc., and how to apply that to the culture. However, it is my role, I see as bishop, at times if I see something going a little bit off, or maybe something expressed in the wrong forum. For example, something that's way over people's heads, or could be misperceived, misunderstood. The theological enterprise, some of that work and scholarship is to be done in the proper perspective. And I think President Kunkel, I don't want to put you on the spot, I think you mentioned you have a way of explaining that these proper ways of exploring the truth should be done in the proper context, and that what you presume of a fourth-year student probably is not good to say to a first-year student, and then what you do in the theological scholarly level may be even different than that for the senior. So these are all kinds, some of them are prudential judgments, some of them come about by bouncing off of what is the magisterial position on a certain issue, and how do I reach that obsequium? How do I reach that adhesion to the truth that the church is striving to express? And also fulfill my role in the case of a theologian or in the case of a scientist, etc. How do I fulfill my role with respect to that obsequium, and also my competence as a professional theologian or as a professional professor in a certain area? And those things are kind of hard to balance often against one another. But this is really the privilege of a Catholic college, that we have that kind of border up against which to measure ourselves, and that kind of modicum of objective truth that we also have to take into our explorations. So I just want to mention that this is the very thing that sometimes can be misunderstood or used in an inappropriate level, in a level which perhaps you would discuss among yourselves as professors, but wouldn't necessarily give to a first-year person studying religious studies. Tom, maybe you want.
Thanks, Bishop. I would say, I remember when I was first contacted about the presidency of St. Norbert College by the gentleman from the search firm, and we were going to have, in a few days, we were going to have our first discussion about this over sort of a sophisticated version of Skype. He sent me a couple questions that, we'll obviously talk about a lot of things, but here are some specific things that, we're going to need to know where you are. And one of them, was, will you be comfortable administrating a college under the principles of ex corde ecclesiae? And I thought, well, I guess I better find out what the hell ex corde ecclesiae is. We didn't come up much against ex corde at the University of Maryland. And I want to make this point because you have heard about it, and obviously I did my homework, and I was very comfortable with the document after I spent spending a lot of time with it. I mentioned to you, we're a Catholic college, and if you've never read ex corde, you should, for all sorts of reasons. It's not a terribly long document, and it's a very elegant document, and it's a very thoughtful document, obviously. And what mostly I came away with was that it really reaffirms the crucial role of higher education within the Catholic universe, if you will. And it talks a lot about the coexistence of faith and reason. And you can talk about that a lot, but I guess the headline is he's just making the point that these don't trump one another. In fact, you cannot, in a sense, have one without the other, and the crucial role that the Catholic college and university plays in the pursuit of both, really. I think it's often been attributed to Father Hesburgh of Notre Dame. I don't know whether he actually coined it, and you've heard it before, but calling a Catholic college or university the place the church goes to think. That's probably a little glib. One hopes that there's good creative thinking within the church at all levels. But in fact, it's true. Every Catholic institution, whether it's an institute or an elementary school or a diocese, or you name it, seminary, they've got a unique role to play within Catholicity, and we do too in higher education, and I think Ex Corde lays that out very, very nicely. I think in that context, it not only preserves academic freedom, but it celebrates academic freedom. As the bishop said, there's no question that there can be instances where there might be tensions, but I can honestly say, certainly in my time, we've never had a case where the diocese or anyone came back to us to suggest that, why are you doing this or why are you doing that, in the academic program. I think that we, internally, we have discussions all the time about this and that, or we're comfortable doing this, we may not be comfortable doing that sometimes get put under the category of academic freedom, but that's a discussion that we're having with ourselves. I just want to assure you that we've never had a situation, at least that I'm aware of, where an external body, the diocese or a bishop, has sort of put us on notice or sort of said, why are you pursuing this? And I wouldn't expect that we would. So I'll stop with that.
I was in the classroom for 25 years, and so I certainly enjoyed the freedom that I was able to exercise as an instructor. Certainly teaching English was far different from teaching canon law or teaching theology. But I think there was a distinction there that was very important. The bishop, when he was quoting from the Ex Corde, actually, part of his paragraph he quoted was actually Canon 229, found in the Code, that talks about the freedom that the laity have and individuals who are in the sacred sciences. I have found during the course of my studies that it's always good to look to the wisdom of the East. And there's a comparable canon in the Eastern Code of Canon Law. Now, theirs was written some 10 years or promulgated 10 years after the Roman was. But I think, in some ways, I think they have moved it forward a little bit. Their canon reads, theologians, with their deeper understanding of the mystery of salvation and with their expertise in the sacred and related sciences, as well as in current problems, have the role and duty, faithfully complying with the authentic magisterium of the Church, and of equal importance, utilizing their freedom to illumine the faith of the Church, to defend it, and to contribute to doctrinal progress. Okay, it's Eastern Church law, but in coming up to understand law, we're allowed to look to comparable sources of law. So I think that deals with the freedom that anybody, I think, in academia has, the right to pursue. And to go back to my earlier reference about teaching English and then theology and canon law, grammar was grammar, and the rules were rules. You kind of bit your tongue on occasion when they were there trying to maybe interpret a piece of literature, and maybe they were close or not so close. But when I began teaching scripture and teaching morality and even to a degree canon law, I found that I had to be very objective. Certainly as a teacher, students intuit where you're coming from. They know where you are grounded. They understand maybe, and sometimes we do it knowingly and sometimes we do it unknowingly where we can push something. But I discovered over the years in teaching in those areas that you're getting into a very private area of someone's life, an area where they too have freedom. And I think we have to provide them with the knowledge and with the understanding where they then are able to go and form their own decisions. And I think that's why, in particular, in teaching, theology and philosophy and so on, there's an extra, I think, challenge to present things, to present ideas objectively, and then let the mind take over. Let them, ultimately make decisions based upon their own faith experience, their own life experience, and don't tread, I think, too heavily where maybe it's inappropriate. But that's my personal experience.
It might help a little bit to know that it's my understanding there's between 400 and 500 Catholic colleges around the world, and half of those are the United States. So there's about, we usually say when asked how many Catholic colleges are there in the United States, about 220. So Ex Corde, in some ways, was really written and especially directed, I think, towards the United States. And there's two parts of Ex Corde. In 1990 was the part that John Paul II wrote, and then the application is what the American bishops wrote 10 years later, and that's what we just reviewed was the application. How's the application going? So, any questions about academic freedom or vision?
Yeah, I'm didn't hear, I've heard a lot about academic freedom, but what and President Kunkel alluded to this a little bit, the role of the college, of a Catholic college in the church itself and in society. I'm just curious to maybe expound a little bit more on that. So a little more externally looking versus internally at the college itself.
Well, again, I'll go to Square Ecclesiae. That's interesting. You asked the question. I just turned to the section. On the local church, there's a whole section in here, too, on that's why I really, encourage you, along with President Kunkel, to read this. The Universal Church, local church, and then there's a whole section on pastoral ministry, but there are also sections on to the administration, the board of trustees, the faculty, administration and staff, etc. This section, there's a whole section on the mandatum, which I'd like to say publicly thank you to so many of you who have asked for the mandatum. Some of you from the Department of Religious Studies, others of you from other departments. I thank you for that, and it's that is in process, and that's confidential between the professor and myself, but I appreciate the efforts of those of you who have requested that. About the local church, and this may get us more into some more of the discussion, it says, in accordance with the church teaching and universal law of the church, the local bishop has a responsibility to promote the welfare of Catholic universities in his diocese. So we saw that already. Bishops should, when appropriate, acknowledge publicly the service of the Catholic university. Diocesan and university authorities should commit themselves mutually to regular dialogues to achieve the goals of Ex Corde Ecclesiae. University authorities and the local diocesan bishops should develop practical methods of collaboration that are harmonious with the university's structure and the statutes. Doctrinal responsibilities, approaches to promoting cooperation and resolving misunderstandings between bishops and theologians, which is a document approved by the conference, can serve as a useful guide for diocesan bishops, professors of the theological disciplines, and administrators of universities to promote informal cooperation and collaboration in the church's teaching. Disputes about church doctrine should be resolved, however possible, in an informal manner. At times, the resolution of such matters may benefit from formal doctrinal dialogue, as proposed by the doctrinal responsibilities. This came up in my recent meeting with the Religious Studies Department. Bishop, how are you going to handle that? If there's some disagreement about church teaching or some doctrinal element, and my first point of view is to say we would start informally with a personal interview between that person and myself. I would bring before you, that person, whatever concern or complaint I have heard. Usually with a complaint, we'll simply call the administration, check out, let them know what's been said, and get a response. What are you doing? What is this situation? And that's kind of our MO with regard to general problems or complaints. With regard to if there was a serious complaint about a professor that wasn't following Catholic teaching, and this was got to be a serious problem and it needed to be taken care of, I would first of all ask the college administration to take care of it. If that didn't work, then I would call for an informal meeting with that person, express my concern, and walk through the process in that particular way. If for some reason there was a departure of conscience on the part of that other person, that would mean they would have to follow their conscience, but then that would put me in a position where I would need to make a decision, because a professor is a public office in the church or a Catholic institution. And so those things all have ramifications, and if that were ever to happen, that's the way I would handle it. Other bishops may handle it differently. But there are these doctrinal responsibilities and approaches to this particular difficulty if that should arise. So from the point of view of the diocesan interaction, that's kind of how I would handle it. And I mentioned that to the religious studies department.
Well, and I think it's important to point out too that, you know, Bishop is not sitting there poring over, you know, syllabi and that kind of thing. One of the reasons that these conversations are important is so that he has a sense that this institution, this administration, and religious studies faculties, you know, are qualified, you know, and they're mindful of the Catholicity of the institution, and that, you know, these are outstanding people who are doing a wonderful job in the classroom, which in fact is true. I mean, to some extent, Jay alluded to this earlier, I think Ex Corde was a response to a lot of what you saw, I don't know how much widespread, but there was a moment in time when at some Catholic colleges and universities, you know, some people were in the classroom literally undermining, you know, official church teaching. And I think this was one of, my opinion is this was one of the responses to that. This is, what he's talking about is not a situation where, you know, you're talking about, we're concerned about tweaking what, you know, professor is teaching in the classroom. This is a situation where if they had a concern of that the fundamental Catholic teaching was being subverted somehow, or, and you know, we've not had that situation. I would not expect that we would. The other thing is I want to say these are not trivial matters, and they wouldn't, they wouldn't be taken trivially.
Is that answering your question?
I guess my question was more towards sort of an external view of the role of Catholic higher ed.
Okay. Certainly in a church, local church, and many local churches where you know there are, we lack sufficient clergy, you know, even to keep parishes going. There needs to be collaboration. We need to invite the Catholic laity to join us in a lot of different efforts, and I think it's very important that individuals, you know, be educated, particularly in what the church calls the sacred sciences. And so I think the philosophy, the theology, you know, the MTS program here at St. Norbert's, I think is inviting to a lot of people who want to get involved in the church, whether through some kind of an official position, a job, or even just for, you know, for personal growth. I just think it important that this source, this resource, and with all the vast, you know, studies that this faculty has done, is a gift. It's a gift to this local community. It's a gift to the local church, and I think we need to celebrate that. And I think as many people as possible we can get involved. Let's continue to do that. So. In some ways, I know I have promoted, you know, some people actually coming and taking some theology classes when they ask questions, and they, you know, they know St. Norbert's is a Catholic school, but they go, they teach theology there? I said, yes. You know, so there's a lot we can do, and I think we can be proactive in that as a Catholic institution, and hopefully we get challenged by the society around us, the community around us, saying, you know, we could really use some help, and we could use some instructions, you know, move us forward. So I see that as an important role.
Dan, I'd like to mention too, in relation to the question you asked, which I think I understand a little better, we make the best contribution to society when we are who we are. And what I mean by that is having a Catholic vision of life and being able to live that Catholic vision of life to the best of our ability. And when we do that, that's how we make the best contribution. When we don't do that and we try to be somebody or something else, we're not going to make the best contribution we can. And I don't mean that by that in the sense of a very narrow one. I think sometimes when I say things like that, people, their minds zoom down into something very narrow and rigid. It isn't. The Catholic approach and vision of life is incredible, inexhaustible. The Catholic way of living is tremendously liberating, but it's based on Scripture and a certain depositum of faith And when we follow that, and we strive to live that to the best of our ability, not only are we happy, but we bring a great contribution to our society, which, believe it or not, is clamoring to hear this word from us. So you'll hear me talking in different homilies I give. Let's really get the Catholic thing down. That doesn't mean that we have to look Catholic in a certain particular external way necessarily, but they should be able to notice us by our joy, by our competence, and understanding the teaching of the Church, and understanding what it means to be Catholic, and having a Catholic way of living that looks different to the world. If we look just like the world, then we're wasting a lot of time and money. We should look different. I don't mean better. I don't mean higher and mightier or something like that. I mean specifically different. And that specific difference comes from really knowing the Scriptures, knowing our tradition, knowing the breadth of knowledge. Universities and colleges came from the Catholic Church. And it came out of a great desire for learning and the love of God, as Jean Leclerc said in that beautiful book, Love of Learning and the Desire for God. That's the Catholic thing. And it's incredibly expansive, especially if we know the fundamentals. We'll be able to live out of those fundamentals and share those with the world, which is so desperate to know it better. They might not say that, but if you look at it, that's really what they're after.
No, I would just add, Dan, that we're a Catholic Norbertine liberal arts college. Okay, we're all those things. We're in the Catholic tradition, as Bishop just discussed. We are a Norbertine institution where we are formed by those values. We're informed by those values. We have those charisms. That's who we are. We're in the liberal arts tradition. That's the way we go about doing what we do. That's the pedagogical pursuit, and we're a college. We are about the creation of new knowledge. We're about the interpretation of existing knowledge. We are here to teach these young men and women how to think and apply that knowledge, in the world. And one hopes to do a better place. If we at some point are not doing all those things, then we're less than what we're supposed to be. So at the end of the day, we have to have fidelity to all of them, including our mission as an institution of higher education.
Other thoughts, questions? Yeah, we spend like weeks talking about this stuff, trying to figure it out, and it's clear, really.
Right.
Okay, the last question is, what does the Catholic intellectual tradition mean to each of you? If you want to briefly talk about that.
You're a Catholic intellectual.
I'm a Belgian. In some ways, I think we've come across that. I look back at my own, education, and I think all my education has been in Catholic institutions. I don't think I've stepped out of that particular sphere, and as I look back at that in my dotage, I think the thing that I take with me, we had mentioned earlier dialogue, and I think that's part of that whole tradition, that ideas are placed before us, and you have an opportunity to talk about them, to share them. In some cases, you are more accepting of some than the others, but it's a growing of mind and body and spirit, and it's challenging, absolutely challenging. And I think people should be drawn to that. And one of the charisms we like to speak about ourselves is a sense of hospitality, and I would hope that intellectual pursuit, that there's a great hospitality there. I think, unfortunately, we live in a world that is very unhospitable. You don't like what I say, well then I don't like you. End of conversation. And that's unfortunate. I mean, it's in the world, it's in this country. I think our state has been paralyzed by that kind of inhospitality, and on occasion, I think even the church has suffered from that. I just think we need to continue to dialogue, to be open to ideas, and maybe they don't move as fast as we would like them to, but they do move. They do make progress. I perhaps shouldn't reveal my political leanings, but if I was in Florida today and I had to vote, I would vote for a dead Richard Nixon. You know, and that's horrible to say, you know, but that's, I think, where we're at. We don't talk. We just kind of presume that because you're from someplace else or you do this differently than me, then you can't be as good as I am, and so why do I waste my time, you know? And I just hope that intellectual pursuits keep our minds open, keep us challenged to build bridges of peace, to be just towards each other. And if we as an institution can do that, then we're going to make this world a far better place than it certainly is now.
Somebody sent me a note the other day. You may have seen versions of this, but it was to the effect that to appropriate an idea from one person is to plagiarize. To appropriate it from many is to do research. So I want to just say here that I'm very fond of quoting my colleague Father Jay on the subject of the Catholic intellectual tradition, and that is to say that in many ways at a Catholic institution we have the greatest academic freedom of all, because if you're at a public institution there is this entire realm that you really, you know, you're sort of proscribed from talking about this question of faith and spirituality and its implications for the world, when in fact at an institution like ours everything is not only open to discussion but beckons discussion. We have a responsibility to it. Bishop alluded to the fact that the higher education tradition sort of sprang from the church in the first place, and so on the one hand I think, you know, that's something that we must and we do and must celebrate, but I also think that it's also incumbent on us to practice that freedom so that we are continuing to produce the sort of knowledge that improves the world and also helps the church, you know, in the evolution of its own positions. And so it's very important in our own, you know, parochial sense, but it's hugely important on a broader sense as well, I think.
I'd just like to use a story from my sister, Carol Ricken, who's here now living in Green Bay with me, and she was a teacher, educator in the public school system and in Pueblo, Colorado, and they used to use as their motto, educating the whole child. And she said, you know, I didn't realize how not true that was in the public school until I started working for the Catholic school. I asked her to come and teach in Cheyenne as principal not to be the principal at the cathedral school. And she says, now I really get to educate the whole child, body, mind, and spirit. Before we couldn't talk about spirit in the public arena. And this is an incredible gift that I think the Catholic University or Catholic College affords us, is that we can talk about something that's very, very important to each individual and to society at large. And when you take the second thought there, what an incredible entrustment these young people and their parents and all the people who are helping them and all of your donors. That's an incredible gift and entrustment of faith that they're giving to you and to us by sending their kids here, by the kids choosing to come here and the young people to come here. What an incredible act of faith and trust that they placed in us. And so when I think about the intellectual tradition, Catholic intellectual tradition, I think about that it's something that we should continuously strive to permeate our whole culture, to permeate our outlook, our worldview, recognizing that we've been given an incredible entrustment, and the Corde Ecclesiae talks about the right of the student to hear what the church teaches, without dispute, first of all, to understand that teaching. And that Catholic intellectual tradition can really form a person better than most any other philosophy that's come down the pike. It's an intellectual tradition that promotes life, the protection of life. It's a tradition that promotes the full development of the person. You look at all the documents and all the great theologians and saints the church has produced, it's all in that vein. It really thinks about the promotion of the qualities and the values of a society that's going to survive. And so the gift and the challenge that you have in this community is incredibly tough, especially facing all the challenges in our world today. So I pray for you all the time. And I pray that this Catholic intellectual tradition can keep feeding you and nourishing you. I remember Father Stevens, who's a very good friend and mentor of mine, he said that really the way to think in a Catholic way is the mind intersecting with revelation. And the result of that intersection then being intersected with the human condition. And there you have success in transmitting a tremendous intellectual vision, Catholic intellectual vision, to those whom we lead and those whom we serve. So there's so much here, so much in the depth of our tradition, and I know there's varying levels of familiarity with all of that, but just having this more and more in the culture here will help incredibly for people to see the dignity of human life, the dignity of each person, and to regard that with very high regard. And sometimes that means compassion, sometimes that means affirmation, sometimes that means challenge, sometimes that means correcting. It's all of those things, because that's what the human person really needs and craves. And so I think the Catholic intellectual tradition is the unique gift, besides all the great competencies this college has, nourishing people in the mind, body, and spirit, and helping them to develop the best. This is probably the greatest and most unique gift that you can give to your students.
Any thoughts, questions? Oh, thanks. I can't get that.
So we live in a pretty interesting, diverse world now. And so the question I have is, how does the Norbertine and the Catholic tradition, how does it sort of imagine itself so that it can be accommodating to the larger world we are living in, at the same time it retains its own authenticity and its own sort of inherent sort of goodness? How does it sort of interplay with the diverse world we're living in?
Norbert, want to mention that, please?
Yeah, no. I mean, that's actually something that it challenges us every day, and we've talked about that. You know, we, as Augustine and Norbert talked about, we're immersed in the world, and yet we're separate. You know, there's that whole struggle that goes on between that which is contemplative and that which is active. And over the almost 900 years that we have existed, that struggle has gone on. And in the first 3 chapters of our Constitution, it talks there very specifically about responding to the needs of the local church. And that will change over time. That changes from culture to culture. If you ever have the opportunity to visit other Norbertine abbeys around the world, you will discover that each one of us has a very specific personality. Even the fact that we do some similar work, you know, in education or in parishes and different kinds of work, we tend to do it a little differently. It's all about our roots and our heritage, but that struggle there, it's personal and it's communal. And sometimes it takes a toll on the smaller community group because we're stretched, we're dragged out. There's so much we can do, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that there's also an internal apostolate that I got to take care of my brothers. And so you're right, it's a challenge, and certainly as a community too, we're as we have gotten smaller and we're looking around, you know, what else can we do? You know, where perhaps better might our talents be used? Where are we being challenged to go? And you know, a couple of years ago, we tried to respond to some of those questions by starting a volunteer house, where we encourage young people to come and to live in, on the east side of Green Bay, live together, pray together, and then go out and do very important service kind of work, serving parts of our population that really need to be helped. You know, we don't have sufficient numbers to necessarily be able to do that on our own, but to encourage others, I think becomes very important. But I think we need to continue to look at that kind of work, to continue to educate, but also to take the time to let ourselves go out there and you know, get our hands involved in things. And in 3 months, when I'm free of an office, I might be able to do that.
Good.
You're not sure about that, are you? If I could just follow up just very quickly. You know, I think the methodology we need to use, coming from our tradition, is one of deep listening. With people who are different than we are, we need to do some deep, deep listening. And in that listening, there comes a sense of dignity and respect for the other, but also an ability for us to be able to truly hear people. Today, everybody's screaming and yelling at one another in the political arena in all kinds of ways, in the public forum. And maybe one of the greatest contributions we can give is from, as Abbott was saying, from our contemplative roots, from our showing deep, deep respect for people, especially who are very different from us, by listening to them and truly being present to them. I've noticed, for example, when sometimes victims of sexual abuse will come and talk to me, and my first reaction is to get defensive, and then I tell myself, settle down, shut up, and listen. And then I tell myself, listen deeper, and then listen more deeply. And as I do that, I don't know if I change or they change, but the whole climate changes, and we can really get down to what's most important. That they are important, that they've been deeply hurt. In the case of a priest or someone in church, this is a terrible misdeed. And when they hear me say that, then after listening deeply, it helps them to believe that I'm sincere. And I am sincere. And I'm able to be more sincere the deeper I listen. So I think with people who are different from us, whether from religious, political, this screaming and yelling stuff is going to get our society nowhere. And maybe that's another contribution from our contemplative roots that we can give our time in prayer, our time of doing deep listening with the Lord, that we can bring a new height and a new level of acceptance to others, not condemnation, but truly listening to them, and then maybe offering something from who we are as a person, as a Catholic, as a student at St. Norbert, as a professor at St. Norbert, as a staff member at the diocese, as a, you know, a department head, whatever, that we are able to say, we want to journey with you, and we have some possible things to offer that might help you and assist you. And if you don't accept it, that's your choice, but here's what we can offer, and we will journey with you as you come into a better place for yourself.
Thanks, Sam. Sarah.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for your openness to this dialogue. I grew up in this diocese, and I graduated from St. Norbert College. I've been working here for over 13 years. And I have a two-part question. Bishop Ricken, last week you issued a letter calling on local Catholics to join you in defying the federal government's rule that requires all health plans to cover contraception. On Sunday, the New York Times ran an article ruling on contraception draws battle lines at Catholic colleges. And I'm wondering, as my first question, what are your expectations of St. Norbert College on this sort of an issue? Secondly, in your letter you also state that people of faith cannot be made second-class citizens. This same argument proved successful earlier this month when the U.S. Supreme Court issued an unprecedented decision that recognizes the so-called ministerial exception opening the door to exempting religious institutions from complying with the ADA and other workplace protections against discrimination. And again, looking at St. Norbert College not only as an educational community, but also as a workplace, how are we to understand the exceptions to federal law that religious institutions, including the Catholic Church, is repeatedly demanding?
I think President Kunkel can answer the particulars with regard to St. Norbert College much better than I can. But I would say, let me just let you know a little bit about why the bishops have chosen to take this stand. And it has a lot, perhaps everything, to do with religious liberty. Whether or not people agree with the Catholic Church about contraception, about abortifacient drugs, and those things that are, would be mandated to be included, that is that we would have to pay people to have those services should they request them. Whether or not that people agree with those particular teachings is really not the point. The point is that this is constitutionally protected right to religious freedom, and that's the point. And that's why the bishops are upset about this, because this goes across the line of that protection that's been in place since the very foundation of this country. And so we see coming, and not just this, but many other encroachments upon freedom of religion, and if this is allowed to go on, what's to stop it from much worse kinds of things? Not that this isn't bad enough, but much worse kinds of encroachments upon the practice of religion. I think this is all part also of another movement to confine the definition of religion, to change it even constitutionally, and there's a movement going on in this country about this, to change it from freedom of religion to freedom of worship. In other words, you and I will be able to do everything we want to do in church, no problem with that, because that's the place of worship. But don't try to carry your religious beliefs out into the public forum. That might even impinge upon works of social justice or charity that the church wants to do. It can impinge on anything outside of the four walls of the church. This definition, changing the definition from freedom of religion to freedom of worship. It certainly would dampen the ability of the church to speak up morally on certain issues that we believe it is incumbent upon us as a member of this society, as individuals, and as a corporate member of this society, that it is important for us to speak up about. So this is the reason the bishops have taken such what may seem very strident position, because we see this as the beginning of a very disastrous encroachment by the state, and we know where that goes from other places in the world, where that's going to lead. With regard to the health insurance, it's going to mean something different perhaps for the diocese than it is from St. Norbert College. I'm not sure, but there are other people here that can handle that much more expertly than I can. And
well, we don't know yet. You know better than most, Sarah, because you're an international, that we get hit with federal regulations and expectations all the time, and whenever that happens, the first thing we do is we step back and say, well, what are we dealing with here? And we get expert opinions about this or that. Now, this is admittedly more high profile, but we were really just at the point where Eileen Yankee and her shop were, would have gone to our insurance experts, because typically in this situation, I mean, we are a church policy that sets us apart from other plans. We're self-funded. That sets us. I mean, so we were just in that early stage of trying to get a sense of what the mechanics are. But I mean, once I saw it, I was quite sure that the bishops, would, be, looking at this very seriously, and there would be legal challenges and the like. And clearly, that's going to happen. I think that, not to speak for the bishop or the abbot, but I'm sure that they're going to view the outcome, as speaking to the fundamental Catholicity of the institutions in play. So, we're, just watching and, reading and waiting, in a sense, like everyone else, in terms of, where this ends up. I personally think, just from the politics of it, that at the end of the day, there will be an accommodation, some sort of a waiver made. I'm stunned that that didn't get worked out in the first place. I mean, we were flabbergasted by this. And I still think in an election year, I mean, we're getting into a whole other area, but there's a long time between now and the resolution of this. I'm sure a lot of things are going to come into play.
We have time for just one more question if there is one. You're all thinking, we sat here, it's time for a reward. Well, if you could all help me thank our panelists one more